LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the July 5th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. This weekend, I picked out the 13 best, most newsworthy clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for which would be a really educational, informative, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all tonight. Down in the video description, I put a link to my clip list. You can follow along with the notes that I use to remind myself what's on each clip. Also, the source of all the clips, all the news shows, down in the video description. Topic tonight is Pandemagogue Trump, a word that I kind of made up, and then I Googled it and found other people had, you never really make something up for the first time. But it's basically the way Trump is trying to demagogue his way out of his failures for this pandemic. He's responded to the huge issues facing his presidency, like the pandemic, the economy, the Russia scandals, including this latest one with Russian bounties given to the Taliban for killing coalition forces. And of course, our whole societal racial reckoning, where he responds by embracing the Confederacy. Anyway, it's denial, dark, divisive rhetoric, rather than the unifying solutions that we need, as I discuss in the video coming up, using corporate news summaries. I have corporate news summaries from all five of the big five corporate outlets, plus newsmaker clips from John Bolton and Susan Rice, two different former national security advisors, plus Susan Rice and Tammy Duckworth, who you can compare as possible Biden vice presidential candidates. Also, Stephen Hahn, the commissioner of the FDA, got grilled by a couple different, by Martha Raddatz and also Dana Bash. I think Dana Bash did a better job, and that's why I'm going to show Dana Bash cross-examining Stephen Hahn on some of the dishonest information coming out of Trump about the pandemic. But before I get to that, for my political comedy clip, I thought I'd show you something that actually helps explain my topic of pandemagoguery with this really interesting interpretation of the word dog whistle, having to do with the 4th of July, from this indigenous activist named Gyasi Ross, who was on AM Joy this morning, which I think might be permanently hosted by the guest host this morning, Tiffany Cross, since Joy Reid is moving to Chris Matthews' 7 p.m. Eastern slot on MSNBC. But I thought, like I said, I thought that Gyasi Ross, who's an activist from who was protesting out at Mount Rushmore, gave a really interesting way to go into the topic that I picked, which I will discuss with you after we watch that clip from MSNBC yesterday morning over here.
First of all, congratulations on hosting. It's nice to see you in that chair. And Sarah, good morning. It's nice to see you as well. It's such a, obviously this, and as you pointed out, Greenwood, North Tulsa, the rallies being at these particular places, this is not coincidental. This man is a master showman. He is somebody who understands hot buttons and red meat and plays to that very, very egregiously. It's not enough that we're going to flout every bit of science and do this rally without masks explicitly. It's not enough that we're going to do this in sacred lands of Lakota people and a place that has been marked by, it's been polluted. It's been desecrated by putting these slave-owning, racist, horrible, horrible white men in 60-foot statues on this wall. It's not enough that we're going to utilize every bit of not even dog whistle anymore, but just express racist rhetoric. It's not enough that he do this, but instead we have to do this on the day that symbolizes for a good portion of the United States that doesn't know better, the notion, the spectacle of freedom. of course, we know that, we understand, speaking of dog whistles, we understand how smart dogs are at this time of year, because they're the only ones that are smart enough to get away from the fireworks. They know that it has nothing to do with freedom. We should be hiding from that language. We should be hiding from that rhetoric. It's...
And I almost had a Sandy clip for you of Sandy hiding from the fireworks. That's definitely true. And for those who don't know what a dog whistle is, there's been talk for many years of Republicans using racist dog whistles, like terms like welfare queens. That was one of Reagan's racist dog whistles, where he wouldn't actually use any racial slurs or even say anyone's race, but use certain terms that people on the other end understood to be racist dog whistles. He also started off his campaign, and wasn't it Philadelphia, Mississippi, where there were, and it's kind of like the Tulsa speech for Trump in the site of the 1921 Tulsa massacre, and that's what that indigenous activist there was talking about. But he was talking about racial dog whistles, and I really liked. I found it to be sort of subtle political comedy, the way he went from racial dog whistles over to dogs knowing to hide from the fireworks from the 4th of July, because it's not really about freedom. It's just a big loud noise, I guess. But anyway, he also talked about how Mount Rushmore was taken from the Lakota people, and by the breaking of a treaty, and that's part of the whole pandemagoguery, the dark, racist, and it's not even a dog whistle. Dog whistles are whistles only dogs can hear. That's why they call it a dog whistle. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to dog-splain that to the dog lovers out there, but it's not a dog whistle anymore. Oh, and speaking of dog whistles, here comes Sandy to lie down over there. I will have a bonus Dash and Sandy clip at the end, but now I want to get to the news summaries. Like I said, I have news summaries from all 5 of the big 5 corporate outlets. And this week, Andrea Mitchell was in for Chuck Todd on NBC News' Meet the Press. And some people think when I say that NBC News' Meet the Press has the best news summary every week, that in some way I'm praising Chuck Todd. And I mean, I'm sure Chuck Todd, he has some producing role on the show, and he probably has something to do with it. But you'll see it's also a very good NBC News Meet the Press news summary of all these issues. And Andrea Mitchell is in as the guest host, but it's probably the same production staff. That's why it's a good news summary. I like the way that both NBC and NBC and CNN, the first 2 news summaries I show, talk about how Trump made 2 divisive speeches on 4th of July weekend. Dark and divisive, that's what a lot of people were calling it, although over on Fox News they're calling it like fiery rhetoric. But somber tone, which I'll get to when I get to the later news summaries. But anyway, here's Andrea Mitchell giving the best news summary, as usual, from NBC News' Meet the Press this morning over here.
Good Sunday morning, and I hope you're having a happy and safe 4th of July weekend. Chuck Todd is away this week, but for the 2nd consecutive night on this holiday weekend, President Trump gave a divisive speech, referring to opponents, among other things, as Marxists and looters, while downplaying the surging pandemic. The coronavirus is exploding across much of the country, with 9 of the worst days for new cases happening in the last 10 days, with 17 states now recording their single-day highs this week. Many are closing down bars, restaurants, beaches, and gyms, some for a second time, while others have delayed reopenings. Even as President Trump says that he thinks or hopes the virus will just disappear, health experts are pleading with Americans: wear a mask, avoid parties, stay at home. This is serious. At the same time, the administration is scrambling to explain why the president did nothing about intelligence indicating the Russians were paying bounties to the Taliban to kill American troops. Mr. Trump has claimed he was not informed. He has attacked the news media and is calling the story a hoax. The issue has raised again the old Watergate question: what did the president know and when did he know it? And prompted a new one: now that he knows, what will he do about it? We'll get to all of that, but we begin with the growing pandemic and a president spending the Independence Day weekend hoping to divide Americans against each other.
The radical left the Marxists, the anarchists, the agitators, the looters.
Stoking divisions during a national crisis, President Trump hosted 2 days of crowded celebrations with social distancing optional and few masks, leaning on the culture wars in an attempt to reboot his campaign. Last night on the White House South Lawn.
We will never allow an angry mob to tear down our statues, erase our history, indoctrinate our children.
And at a fireworks display Friday at Mount Rushmore, the president continues to make inaccurate claims as he plays down the pandemic.
We have tested almost 40 million people. By so doing, we show cases, 99% of which are totally harmless.
Even as many fellow Republicans join a chorus of public officials urging Americans to scale back their 4th of July plans.
The virus is spreading so fast, there is little margin for error.
This should be a wake-up call to all of us that we are in the fight of our lives.
Reported cases are up more than 20% in 34 states over the last 2 weeks, even topping 55,000 cases a day overall.
I would not be surprised if we go up to 100,000 a day if this does not turn around.
But the president is denying those facts.
I think that at some point that's going to sort of just disappear, I hope.
The last month has been a tough one for the president, with self-inflicted wounds on the virus.
So I said to my people, slow the testing down, please.
On race and policing.
There's looting, there's probably going to be shooting.
Retweeting a video of a supporter shouting white power.
White power! White power!
And a widening scandal over his handling of intelligence about a Russian plot to kill U.S. and coalition troops in Afghanistan.
I think it's a hoax.
Nearly 2/3 of voters disapprove of Mr. Trump's handling of the virus. Public polls show the president trailing Joe Biden in a number of battleground states.
When you're in the barrel, when you're getting a lot of bad press and the polls are going against you, you need to do something that says we're moving in a different direction.
Now, after months of mixed messages on the pandemic, the White House is settling on a new one. Learn to live with it.
We have some areas where we're putting out the flames or the fires, and that's working out well.
But around the country, many states, like Texas, are making it clear it's not working out well, issuing mandatory mask orders. And even the president's allies are shifting their tone.
Arm yourself with a mask.
The stakes are too high for this political debate about pro-Trump, anti-Trump masks.
People are saying, you know, I wish the president would put on a mask every once in a while, just because it would make him look as if he's taking it seriously.
And joining me now is Democratic Governor Phil Murphy of New Jersey. Governor Murphy.
No, I won't have Phil Murphy of New Jersey on with with Andrea Mitchell, although I will have a clip later, if you're following along on the clip list, of Andrea Mitchell talking to Susan Rice, the former Obama National Security Advisor, who may be or is on the short list to be Biden's vice presidential pick, talking about that Russian bounty scandal that Trump has known possibly since last year, that the Russians were putting bounties on American and other coalition troops, giving the Taliban money to kill them off, and did nothing about it, or either didn't know or ignored. And I talked about that last week, and I will have two clips on that, dueling clips from Susan Rice and John Bolton, two former national security advisors. That's clips number 9 and or 8 and 9 coming up after the news summaries. But like I said, that was the best and longest news summary from NBC News' Meet the Press. I think it showed a lot of the clips of the pandemagoguery we've been getting from Trump. Talked about him saying, 99% of the cases are harmless, which is obviously not true. That's what Stephen Hahn's going to be cross-examined on in my last clip number 13. But that comes up in most of these news summaries, all I think except for the Fox News Sunday news summary. And this next one is Dana Bash over on CNN State of the Union. Like I said, what I liked about these first two news summaries is they both started off their summaries talking about two divisive speeches on 4th of July weekend. I mean, who does that? What kind of president makes too, calling out the Marxists and the anarchists and the you saw it in the last news summary. Here it is again, much shorter. This is only about 83 seconds from CNN State of the Union, where the State of our Union this week is honoring our freedom even in strange times. 2 divisive speeches on the 4th of July that I will talk about after we watch this news summary together over here.
I'm Dana Bash in for Jake Tapper in Washington, where the State of our Union is honoring freedom even in strange times. Happy 4th of July weekend. As Americans celebrated the country's birthday, President Trump did nothing to try to unify a nation still crippled by the coronavirus pandemic and deep cultural unrest. Instead, he used the occasion to deliver 2 divisive speeches. At an event in front of Mount Rushmore Friday night, the president outlined an us versus them re-election message, framing mostly peaceful protests as a radical assault on American life.
We will never allow an angry mob to tear down our statues, erase our history, indoctrinate our children, or trample on our freedoms.
And on Saturday, in front of the White House, the president repeated his argument, this time comparing his fight against the, quote, radical left to America's defeat of the Nazis. The events were both held with little to no social distancing or masks, ignoring his own administration's health guidelines. And as coronavirus cases continue to break records in multiple states across the country and the death toll approaches 130,000, I want to bring in our guest, a member of the President's Coronavirus Task Force, FDA Commissioner Dr. Stephen Hahn. Dr. Hahn, thank you.
Oh, and like I said, I will have the final news clip. Clip number 13 is going to be Dana Bash grilling FDA Commissioner Stephen Hahn about what Trump said, 99% harmless. 99% of all those infections are harmless, even though 20%, I thought it was 20% of people have to go to the hospital, although you'll see Dana Bash says 20% have to get oxygen or go to the hospital, which, anyway, it's not 99% harmless, and I think I pretty much pre-criticized that news summary before I showed it. This next news summary is from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Martha Raddatz also does a good job talking about how our 4th of July is overshadowed not by the 2 divisive Trump speeches, but that comes up, but by COVID-19, and also talks about the Russian bounty problem, the protests, Mount Rushmore, and there's a really good graph I will talk about. I will show you the graph again after you see it in this news summary, because it's not just COVID cases, it's COVID hospitalizations, which I will talk about with you a little more after we watch Martha Raddatz, the co-host of ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, though then it should be with George Stephanopoulos or Martha Raddatz, right? But anyway, here's Martha Raddatz hosting the show this morning over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week on this July 4th weekend. While fireworks lit up the skies across the country, for many Americans, this year's celebrations overshadowed by the battle against the coronavirus. Some beaches, normally crowded, were shut down. In Rhode Island, the nation's oldest Independence Day parade was scaled back to vehicles only. But it was full steam ahead for President Trump. Despite warnings from top health experts against holding large gatherings, the president began his Independence Day celebrations at Mount Rushmore, with thousands of supporters packed together with few visible masks. The president barely mentioning the pandemic, choosing instead to attack those protesting racial injustice. At the White House Saturday, he repeated divisive themes from his past campaigns as his efforts at re-election begin to falter.
Those that are lying about our history, those who want us to be ashamed of who we are not interested in justice or in healing. Their goal is demolition.
This as top health officials warn the United States is going in the wrong direction. New coronavirus cases passing the 50,000 mark on 4 different days last week. And after decreasing for nearly a month and a half, hospitalizations are trending up. This morning, we'll talk to leaders from hot zones in some of the hardest hit states, Texas, Arizona, and Florida. And we begin with Miami and Mayor Francis Suarez.
And I don't have Mayor Suarez of Miami, but I will have a clip later of Mayor Kate Gallego of Phoenix, Arizona, talking to Martha Raddatz. Like I said before I showed the clip, the most important graph there, I think, was this one, the increase in COVID-19 hospitalizations. Because, you know, Trump can say as much as he wants that, you know, increased testing means we're finding more cases. If we didn't test, we wouldn't find cases. But testing doesn't create hospitalizations. Testing doesn't create 130,000 deaths. I think on one of the shows they said by the end of July we're probably going to be around 160,000, and who knows where we're going to be by November 3rd, the election. But the next news summary is from CBS News's Face the Nation. Sometimes I've criticized Face the Nation and Margaret Brennan many weeks as Fox News Light, which is it's sort of the most right-leaning of the actual journalistic programs. You know, Fox News is not journalism. If you read The Loudest Voice in the Room, you'll find out Fox News was created to be a propaganda arm of the Republican Party, and that's what it is. It's also a pro-Trump propaganda organ for much of the day. Sometimes some journalism is committed, you know, sort of incidentally by some of the people who work there, but that is not the main purpose, and I've talked about that many weeks. But CBS News' Face the Nation is kind of right-leaning, or CBS is apparently the news program, based on my commentary over many months and years. But they actually are journalistic, but this week they definitely fought back against Trump. The second thing I'm going to show you is the news summary, where Margaret Brennan says they've been trying to get Anthony Fauci on the program for 3 months and they won't send anyone. And they've been trying to get someone from the CDC and can't get anyone from the CDC. You may remember last week I talked about how Mark Strassman, their reporter's always reporting from Atlanta, and that's where the CDC is, and he never seems to say anything about the CDC, although last week he gave like a brief mention of the CDC, and I'm like, finally, he's in Atlanta for some reason, but I guess the reason he's been there all these months is because he's like every day knocking on the door, CDC, please talk to me, CDC, please talk to me, and for some reason Anthony Fauci and the CDC won't talk to the media. Trump won't let them be cross-examined by journalists, I guess, and that's the second thing I'm going to show you. But the first thing is sort of like the CBS revenge. They set this is the part of the program I don't usually show. It's like the teaser preview, but where there's like music in the background and they sort of preview what the show's going to be about. And in this one, they totally skewer Donald Trump as being a source of misinformation, and basically they do in this little preview what they can't do because they don't have Anthony Fauci. They like show Trump lying, and then they show Anthony Fauci telling the truth. And this is the beginning of the program, the teaser preview that I don't normally show, that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
I'm Margaret Brennan in Washington, and this week on Face the Nation, it's been a disturbing 4th of July weekend as the coronavirus wildfire continues to spread and the president's fiery rhetoric divides rather than unites America. The nation's capital was ground zero for an eerie and edgy 4th of July, with images of a birthday celebration featuring Americans exercising their First Amendment rights. There are shocking spikes in new cases, a 90% increase in the last 2 weeks, particularly in the South and some parts of the West. From coast to coast, there's a divide between Americans assuming personal responsibility in their behavior and a refusal of some to accept the reality of the coronavirus.
And we'll likely have a therapeutic and/or vaccine solution long before the end of the year. We've learned a lot. We've learned how to put out the flame.
But scientists and medical experts see it differently.
We're going in the wrong direction. I'm very concerned because it could get very bad.
Dr. Anthony Fauci, the country's top virus expert, predicted we could see 100,000 new cases a day, double what we're seeing today.
What we've seen over the last several days is a spike in cases that are well beyond the worst spikes that we've seen. That is not good news. We've got to get that under control, or we risk an even greater outbreak in the United States.
With protests and record high joblessness across the nation, President Trump chose Mount Rushmore Friday to launch a campaign against what he calls far-left fascism.
Angry mobs are trying to tear down statues of our founders, deface our most sacred memorials, and unleash a wave of violent crime in our cities.
Another attack came on the 4th of July.
We are now in the process of defeating the radical left, the Marxists, the anarchists, the agitators, the looters, and people who, in many instances, have absolutely no clue what they are doing.
So you see, even like in that first 2 minutes there, the preview teaser of Face the Nation, Margaret Brennan is showing the two divisive speeches, but that was like, I don't know if subtle is the right word, but it was definitely savage burn of Donald Trump through video editing, or it's a little bit understated in that you hear Margaret Brennan saying, some refusing to accept the reality of the coronavirus epidemic, or whatever it was she said in there, and then immediately cutting to Trump saying total misinformation, lack of reality about, where we are with COVID-19. Like I said, I thought that was a pretty brutal takedown of Trump from a generally more right-leaning, though journalistic operation, CBS News' Face the Nation. But the reasoning for it, like I said, you can see in this real news summary. This is like after there was a little more of the preview teaser that I didn't want to show you the whole thing, just because it doesn't relate to my topic and what I'm talking about. But here's 4 minutes, the final journalistic news summary before I show you how Fox News covered the week. This is CBS News' Face the Nation, Margaret Brennan doing her brief intro, talking about how they've tried to get Anthony Fauci and someone from the CDC, can't get them, and then putting it over to Mark Strassman in Atlanta, which finally explains why he's spent 3 months in Atlanta not talking to the CDC, because no one at the CDC will talk to him, as I will talk about with you after we watch this CBS News Face the Nation news summary. Oh, and I also, before I get to that, I wanted to thank, I saw I got multiple Super Chat contributions along the way here. Let me show you those. So yeah, that's really helpful. I appreciate Matthew has been contributing every week here through Super Chat for like 3 or 4 weeks, and M. Bahati Kumba, that's a extra significant contribution, so I appreciate that. And of course, Sexy Bob and Lulu Girl are regular contributors, and since a majority of weeks I don't get ad revenue, or even when I do get ad revenue, it's like after I get all the views on my videos. The Super Chat contributors, the Patreon patrons, and PayPal contributors, that link I put down in the video description, I appreciate all of that support. But like I said, now I want to show the CBS News Face the Nation news summary that I already over-introduced, and we'll talk about with you a little more after we watch Margaret Brennan complaining about the Trump administration being anything but transparent over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. It may be the most sobering morning after the 4th of July in America's history, as we wake up to the 4th day in a row of more than 50,000 new reported cases of COVID-19. They're on the rise now in 40 of 50 states. We are committed to bringing you the facts about the virus and the most knowledgeable guests that we can. We think it's important for our viewers to hear from Dr. Anthony Fauci and the Centers for Disease Control. But we have not been able to get our requests for Dr. Fauci approved by the Trump administration in the last 3 months. And the CDC, not at all. We will continue our efforts. Our coverage begins this morning with CBS News national correspondent Mark Strassman in Atlanta.
Washington, D.C.'s celebration of the 4th last night masked a feeling far from festive. On the National Mall, police and protesters were in no mood to party. D.C.'s mayor had urged people to stay safe and stay home. And at the White House, masks were available, but few people wore them, as President Trump bragged about his administration's response to the pandemic.
We have tested almost 40 million people. By so doing, we show cases, 99% of which are totally harmless.
Tell that to health officials across the country. They saw a parade of non-social distancers this weekend. Like this pool party in Michigan and another in Missouri's Lake of the Ozarks area. A rolling wave of COVID already has hit America's Sun Belt. States with the biggest spike over the last week: Georgia, Louisiana, Nevada, Arizona, South Carolina, and Florida. This holiday weekend, South Florida beaches are closed. On Saturday, the state posted 2 alarming COVID records: almost 11,500 new cases in a single day, and its testing positivity rate hit almost 18%. Roughly 1 in 5 newly sick Americans is a Floridian. Governor Ron DeSantis.
I don't think anyone predicted a Sunbelt resurgence in mid-June.
Not exactly true. Many health experts predicted spikes in states that aggressively stayed open for business, like Florida, like Texas. This state's averaging 6,500 new cases a day, 3 times its April average. A mask mandate now covers most of the state. In California, some beaches were closed, others crowded. The virus has burst again in California, the first state to shut down back in March. Roughly 6,300 new cases a day.
Avoid crowds and avoid going to large parades outside of your household.
But for these tailgaters in Folsom, California, COVID fatigue mixed with patriotic pride. The cars were parked 6 feet apart. In Arizona, free COVID testing drew hundreds of people. A sign of the worry here, some cars waited 8 hours before organizers ran out of supplies. Balancing vital signs and dollar signs remains tricky. Expect fuller flights on American Airlines. It's selling middle seats again. And Major League Baseball's abbreviated season is less than 3 weeks away. But America's national pastime already has America's virus. At least 38 players and staff have tested positive. The good news, COVID mortality rates are dropping. Still, by the end of this month, some health experts predict as many as 160,000 Americans will have died from the virus. People heard the call to have a low-key holiday weekend. But did they listen? Margaret?
Mark Strassman in Atlanta, thank you. We want to go now to one of the nation's hot spots. That's Houston.
I don't have the Houston interview. The later clip I have, Margaret Brennan is talking to John Bolton. That's after the Susan Rice. It's the Susan Rice versus John Bolton, 2 former national security advisors. Those are the 2 news clips I'm going to show you right after this final news summary from Fox News Sunday. I think I talked about that CBS News Face the Nation news summary pretty extensively before I showed it. This Fox News Sunday news summary has a lot less. It certainly doesn't talk about Trump making 2 dark, divisive speeches over the 4th of July. It does have some negative coverage of Trump regarding the Russia bounty on coalition soldiers paid, Russia paying the Taliban to kill off Americans and other coalition soldiers. That makes it into this report. But a lot of the other nasty pandemagoguery from the Trump administration isn't in the news summary from Fox News Sunday. Emanuel is, I guess Chris Wallace has 4th of July weekend off. Mike Emanuel is not the worst person on Fox News. He's been there for a long time. And then Mark Meredith gives the report that, it may not be quite as bad as if it was actually written by the White House press office, but pretty close, as I will discuss with you after we watch that final news summary together over here.
And hello again on this Independence Day weekend from Fox News in Washington. Americans face yet more uncertainty as the number of coronavirus infections hits new highs. Some states are pumping the brakes on reopening, and many July 4th celebrations were scaled back. This comes as the Labor Department reports the U.S. added 4.8 million jobs last month, and as the president heats up his rhetoric over how to frame our nation's past leaders. In a moment, we'll talk with Labor Secretary Eugene Scalia. But first, Mark Meredith joins us live from the White House with the latest. Mark?
Mike, President Trump invited friends, family, and first responders to the White House last night for the 4th of July celebration. While in other cities, because COVID cases are surging, celebrations were canceled to help slow the spread. President Trump celebrated Independence Day by watching a dazzling flyover showcasing America's military might, but in his prepared remarks, a more somber tone.
We are now in the process of defeating the radical left, the Marxists, the anarchists, the agitators, the looters, and people who, in many instances, have absolutely no clue what they are doing.
White House guests were encouraged but not required to wear masks or social distance. The speech echoed the president's fiery rhetoric a day earlier at Mount Rushmore, while Joe Biden says Americans should embrace the debate over racial injustice.
It's past time to fully confront systemic racism, to end our growing economic inequity, to deal with the denial of our nation's promise.
Protests continued throughout the weekend, and in Baltimore, demonstrators toppled a statue of Christopher Columbus. Meantime, there were plenty of fireworks on Capitol Hill last week as lawmakers demanded answers over reports Russia offered bounties to militants to target U.S. troops in Afghanistan. Democrats accused President Trump of ignoring the issue.
He should spend more time reading the daily presidential brief than planning military parades.
The White House continues to celebrate the latest jobs report, with the Labor Department reporting 4.8 million jobs added in June, a potential sign the economy is bouncing back from its pandemic lows. The president says he's open to another round of direct payments and help for small businesses, but lawmakers remain split, Mike, about how to move forward with this potential next stimulus bill. Mike?
Mark Meredith reporting from the White House. Mark, thanks very much. Joining me now, Secretary of Labor and White House Coronavirus Task Force member Eugene.
That was Eugene Scalia, son of Antonin Scalia. His father died while Trump was running for president and helped Trump get elected by leaving a vacancy on the Supreme Court that Obama wasn't allowed to fill, and then Trump filled with Neil Gorsuch. But I'm not going to show you any Antonin Scalia clips. I think I pretty much pre-criticized that Fox News Sunday news summary. I think it was held Trump a lot less accountable than any of the previous four, especially the first three news clips since CBS News' Face the Nation. Well, this week they definitely held Trump accountable, so I can't even complain about CBS this week, but Fox News Sunday was definitely much softer on Trump, did have sort of the national security concerns that right-wing, military industrial complex types who, are really members of the conservative deep state, not the Trump deep state that is made up, but there's an actual real deep state that Glenn Greenwald talks about, which is not liberal, it's conservative, it's pro-war, secret intelligence intercepts of, the whole NSA spying apparatus. And anyway, I don't want to go into that whole tangent. But speaking of the NSA, National Security Advisors, the next two clips are two dueling National Security Advisors, Susan Rice from the Obama administration, and then John Bolton from the Trump administration. And actually, I also want to juxtapose this Susan Rice clip, clip number 8 coming up, with the clip after the John Bolton clip, clip number 10, Tammy Duckworth, because both Susan Rice and Tammy Duckworth are sort of auditioning to be Joe Biden's vice presidential candidate. And in some ways, I think Susan Rice would be a genius pick, because she's a black woman, of course. You know, he said he's going to pick a woman, and she's a black woman. And she has intense, extensive national security experience. You know, one of the things, since Biden is, you know, so old, oldest president to be inaugurated in his first term, he needs someone ready to be president on day one, commander-in-chief, and Susan Rice fits the bill. But it would so troll the right wing, it would so troll Fox News, because Susan Rice is one of the villains of Benghazi. And the thing about Benghazi is it was so overhyped, it held the Obama administration and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton to such an impossible standard of perfection that the right wing and Fox News has in no way held Trump. You know, just this scandal of Russia offering bounties to the Taliban to kill American troops probably, if it's investigated, killed more than 4 Americans. And that's how many Americans died in Benghazi. So just this one scandal is more than the Benghazi scandal. And then, of course, we're at like 130,000 dead Americans from coronavirus. How many Benghazis is that? And how many scandals in the Trump administration have been so much worse than this whole Benghazi thing that the Republican... So Susan Rice, nominating Susan Rice and calling back the stupidity of the Benghazi scandal versus all of the Trump administration scandals, in some ways would be genius. And anyway, I think Susan Rice does a good job of calling out the Trump administration in the almost 5-minute clip from NBC News' Meet the Press, talking to Andrea Mitchell about these issues I want to talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
And welcome back. Well, there are so many questions about the story that Russia offered bounties to the Taliban to kill American service members in Afghanistan. Among them, did President Trump ignore the intelligence, or was he never told? If he was not told, why not? And now that he does know, will he do anything about it? Joining me now is the former National Security Advisor under President Obama, Ambassador Susan Rice. She is also the author of Tough Love, My Story of the Things Worth Fighting For. Ambassador Rice, welcome back to Meet the Press, and a happy holiday weekend to you. Thanks for being with us.
Same to you, Andrea. Good morning and happy 4th weekend.
Thank you. And on this 4th of July weekend, the story of the Russian intelligence, the intelligence that Russia organized bounties to target American soldiers and coalition officers in Afghanistan. The president has now referred to this as a hoax. What message does that send to Vladimir Putin?
Well, Andrea, the message to Vladimir Putin is you can kill American servicemen and women with absolute impunity. This is an extraordinary revelation. The President of the United States has demonstrated absolutely callous disregard for the safety and security of American forces in a war zone. And there's no explanation for this. Why, 10 days after the story was first published and the President is claiming he hadn't been briefed, has he not come out and said to the American people, my top priority is to protect our men and women in uniform? And I will get to the bottom of this intelligence. I will figure out why it is that Russia appears to be targeting our forces. And I will give the American people and the soldiers the appropriate response that it deserves. He said nothing. And Andrea, I don't buy this story that he was never briefed. I believe that over a year ago, when the information first came to light in 2019, that my successor, John Bolton, would have walked straight into the Oval Office, as I would have, and informed the president of this intelligence. You don't wait until you have 100% certainty. You tell the commander-in-chief what he needs to know when he needs to know it. And so now they're claiming, well, he wasn't told. Well, if that's the case, and maybe these advisors in 2020, when the information came back again, failed to tell him, I wouldn't doubt that, because they're scared of him, I believe. But the point is, our servicemen and women are in a war zone vulnerable. We have credible information that suggests that the Russians and maybe Putin himself are trying to kill American service members, and the president calls it a hoax.
Let me show you some of the responses from the White House officials trying to downplay the reliability of this intelligence. Let's watch.
We were dealing with something that was unverified, uncorroborated. There was no consensus in the IC.
For us, for the professionals, we like to see verified information.
Until it is verified, it is not briefed up to the President of the United States. That's how intelligence works.
That's how intelligence works. The intelligence on Osama bin Laden being in that hideaway in Pakistan was 50-50. 50-50, and President Obama went after bin Laden, and you know the results. Is intelligence ever 100% or most likely 100%?
No, Andrea, look, I was National Security Advisor. I can tell the American people with certainty that we don't ever or very, very rarely have 100% certainty. And that's not what we're aiming for. We, in this business of protecting the American people and our servicemen and women, have to do so often with imperfect information. But what we just heard out of my successor, Mr. O'Brien, and the press secretary, is a clown show. That's not how intelligence works. And that's not how the National Security Advisor and the top cabinet level officials who are there to support the president are supposed to behave. They are supposed to be on top of information like this. They're supposed to run it to the ground. It shouldn't be months or years before we figure out whether something of this significance is actually something we take seriously. In fact, the intelligence community did take it seriously. We know that because it was written in the president's daily briefing, the most important and exclusive product of the intelligence community. The president didn't read it. And what's extraordinary is that the people around him didn't bring it to his attention, allegedly.
Why, if this intelligence was important?
So, yeah, that was the Susan Rice clip that makes it clear that what Andrea Mitchell showed in her follow-up questioning, which was good, the clips of Trump administration officials trying to justify this whole Russia bounty story by saying, oh, we hadn't verified the intelligence, so Trump wasn't briefed. Well, as Susan Rice said there, and Andrea Mitchell alluded to, no intelligence is ever 100% verified. Obama went forward on killing Osama bin Laden based on equivocal intelligence. That's not the way intelligence works, and Susan Rice made that clear there. I think she also did a good job of auditioning to be Joe Biden's vice president. I don't know if she's the best choice, or Tammy Duckworth also has things that make her a good choice. That's the clip after next, but you saw in that last clip that Susan Rice called out John Bolton, saying if he found out about this in 2019, as has been reported, he wouldn't have waited. He would have gone into the president and said, this is something, there's a nuclear power killing off our troops. We've got to do something about that, which is what you'll hear John Bolton say by the end of this clip. He won't say what he won't confirm he knew about classified material. He won't confirm whether he knew about this or not, but he corrects Dana Bash. He corrects Margaret Brennan in this CBS News Face the Nation clip, saying, she says, well, way back in 2018, there was reports that Russia was supporting the Taliban. Supporting the Taliban isn't the same thing as paying the Taliban to kill American troops, which John Bolton points out here. And by the end of this clip, he's saying, hypothetically, if I'd heard about that, I would have done just what Susan Rice said in that last clip, gone into the president and said, you got to pay attention to this. So he pretty much confirms by the end of this clip, even though he doesn't do it, he does it over time in answer to a follow-up question, but I think John Bolton confirms what Susan Rice said on the CBS News Face the Nation interview clip over here.
As you mentioned there, on Afghanistan and Russia, as you know, the current National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien, has acknowledged that the U.S. did indeed have intelligence that Russia was paying bounties for American dead. But he said that information was withheld by a CIA officer from the president, even though it was in the brief. Were you ever aware of bounties when you were a National Security Advisor?
Well, I'm not going to comment on what I knew or didn't know out of the intelligence, but I do think it's important for people to understand intelligence doesn't come in only two qualities, the fully verified intelligence and then the unverified intelligence.
Well, I want to narrow in on this because this morning, I just want to make sure you know, this morning, Susan Rice, the National Security Advisor to President Obama, went on television on another network and said the information came to light in 2019 when you were in the job, and she believes you would have told the president. Is she wrong? Did you know about that?
Well, I've said in countless other interviews, I'm not going to disclose classified information. I've got struggle with the president trying to repress my book on that score already. I will say this, all intelligence is distributed along a spectrum of uncertainty. And this intelligence in 2020, by the administration's own admission, was deemed credible enough to give to our allies. So the notion that you only give the really completely 100% verified intelligence to the president would mean you give him almost nothing. And that's just not the way the system works. And it's certainly not a decision made only by the briefer who briefs the president twice a week. That's a decision that, at least when I was there, would have been made by the Director of National Intelligence, the Director of the CIA, myself, and the briefer together.
Right. Well, I mean, this information that Russia was providing weapons and money to the Taliban was made public in 2018 by the then commander of U.S. forces in Afghanistan. So you may have known about it when you were in that job. I'm wondering if you are, in your remarks today, sort of politely saying that the current National Security Advisor failed in his job.
Look, I'm not going to, I don't want to make this a matter of personalities. And by the way, what was made public in 2018 was Russian assistance to the Taliban, and that's been known for some time. That alone is troubling. What is particularly troubling, if true, is this latest information that they were providing compensation for killing Americans. And that is the kind of thing that that you go to the president on and say, look, Mr. President, heads up, we may not know everything on this, but a nuclear power is reportedly providing bounties to kill Americans. That's the kind of thing you need to have in the president's view so that he can think about it as he develops, well, at least as normal presidents develop strategy to handle Russia, to handle Afghanistan.
Before I let you go, I want to ask you, you, in your book, were very...
I like the way John Bolton refers to... well, he refers to normal presidents as a way to say that Trump isn't a normal president. But like I said before I showed the clip, by the end of that clip, I think John Bolton pretty much confirms what Susan Rice said, that John Bolton, if he heard about this whole, he won't confirm he heard about it. He won't confirm he told Trump. But hypothetically, if he had heard about it, he definitely would have told Trump, is what he just said in that last clip about the information that Russia was paying the Taliban to kill American troops. And how many Benghazis is that? And anyway, that's, like I said before I showed the last two clips, is a reason Susan Rice might be a good vice presidential pick. But Tammy Duckworth is a military veteran who lost parts of both of her legs in Iraq as a helicopter pilot back in 2004, which I think would be a great contrast against President Bone Spurs, as I believe Tammy Duckworth has referred to him in the past. And support my whole premise that both Susan Rice and Tammy Duckworth are out here as doing their auditions to be Biden's vice president. She even takes a shot at Trump's vice president, Mike Pence, in this clip, and that's who Tammy Duckworth would be debating. And in this clip, she talks both about, first, you'll see Dana Bash does an introduction about how Tammy Duckworth is holding up the promotions of generals and colonels in the military to make sure that Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, who testified against Trump in the impeachment hearings, doesn't get screwed out of his promotion. But she also talks about this weird love of the Confederacy and how Trump might veto the National Defense Authorization Act, which funds the entire military industrial complex. Trump might veto the entire military industrial complex just to keep Confederate leaders' names on U.S. military bases, which makes no sense. And Tammy Duckworth talks about in the clip I will talk about with you from CNN's State of the Union, talking to Dana Bash this morning over here. Oh, before I show this clip, you'll see that Dana Bash, right in the first minute, her audio drops out. Not my mistake, CNN's mistake, which makes me feel a little better about some of the mistakes I make. Oh, and I also wanted to thank Chair's Bed for giving a $19.99 super chat contribution, thanking me for the time I put in. That's right, this show takes like 8 to 10 hours every Sunday for the last 376 Sundays. That's over 7 years, if you can do the math. So I appreciate that contribution, appreciating my time, because it does take a lot of time every Sunday for many Sundays. But anyway, like I said, here's Tammy Duckworth talking about both how she is protecting Colonel Vindman from the demagogic retaliation of our demagogue autocrat. Maybe you noticed over my shoulder here, I have Masha Gessen's new book, Surviving Autocracy. And so Tammy Duckworth is helping us survive Trump's autocracy and also talking about the Confederacy in the clip I will talk about with you after we watch it together over here.
Tammy Duckworth is blocking more than 1,000 military promotions to try to protect impeachment witness Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, and that as the senator is picking up buzz as a potential running mate for Vice President Joe Biden. One column this week calling her, quote, the anti-Trump, the antidote to the ugliness he revels in and the cynicism he stokes. So joining me now is Illinois Senator Tammy Duckworth, a former Army Lieutenant Colonel who served as a helicopter pilot in Iraq. Senator, thank you so much for joining me. President Trump gave a speech at Mount Rushmore Friday night. He talked about the importance of preserving historical monuments. Take a listen.
Our nation is witnessing a merciless campaign to wipe out our history, defame our heroes, erase our values, and indoctrinate our children.
Senator, I know that you support changing the name of military bases named after Confederate leaders, but there are leaders like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson who were slave owners, and some people are demanding that their monuments come down too. So in your view, where does it end? Should statues, for example, of George Washington come down?
Well, let me just say that we should start off by having a national dialogue on it at some point. But right now we're in the middle of a global pandemic, and one of our countries that are opposed to us, Russia, has put a bounty on American troops' heads. What really struck me about the speech that the president gave at Mount Rushmore was that he spent more time worried about honoring dead Confederates than he did talking about the lives of the 130,000 Americans who lost their lives to COVID-19, or by warning Russia off of the bounty they're putting on Americans' heads. I mean, his priorities are all wrong here. He should be talking about what we're going to do to overcome this pandemic. What are we going to do to push Russia back? And instead, he had no time for that. He spent all his time talking about dead traitors.
So that might be true, but George Washington, I don't think anybody would call him a traitor. And there are moves by some to remove statues of him. Is that a good idea?
I think we should listen to everybody. I think we should listen to the argument there. But remember that the president at Mount Rushmore was standing on ground that was stolen from Native Americans who had actually been given that land during a treaty. And again, let's talk about the greater context of where we are in our country right now. We should be talking about the fact that COVID-19 is experiencing a resurgence, and both this president and the man he put in charge of the pandemic response team, the vice president, have both failed miserably at their jobs. I'm more worried about the 130,000 who have lost their lives recently and the thousands and thousands more Americans who are currently sick than I am about our historical past. We need to talk about what we're doing now to bring this country off of the brink of chaos that it's in.
So I'm going to ask about that for sure in a minute. I want to ask also about the fact that you announced that you would block Senate confirmations of over 1,000 military officers until the Defense Department confirms that Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, who is a key impeachment witness, he was against President Trump, to make sure that he gets his promotion. Have you heard from the Defense Department?
I have not heard from the Defense Department. Let's just make it clear. If Lieutenant Colonel Vindman is on that list, he made his way on it through his own job performance, and you can't get on the promotion list unless you were recommended to be on it by your rater, your intermediate rater, and your senior rater. So 3 superior officers have to agree to put you on the promotion list. And all I'm saying is I will not support the promotion of anybody to the rank of colonel or general unless the Defense Department certify to me that if he is on the list, they won't take him off. The reports that I heard was that he was on the list, but that the White House had directed the Secretary of Defense to take his name off, a list that he earned his way onto himself. And I'm not blocking the promotions of anybody below the rank of lieutenant colonel. So just colonels and generals.
So let's talk about the coronavirus and
So what do you think? Clip 8 and clip 10, that was clip 10. Clip before last was Susan Rice, both possible Biden vice presidential candidates. What do you think? Susan Rice, Tammy Duckworth, they both have things that would make them great vice presidential candidates, great additions to the Biden campaign that's already doing a great job winning against Trump by doing very little and just letting Trump destroy himself with his pandemagoguery, I guess. But I want to follow up on that last clip with Tammy Duckworth by showing this next clip of Senator Jack Reed of Rhode Island talking about the National Defense Authorization Act that Trump has threatened to veto because they're going to rename certain military bases that were named after Confederate war heroes, people who actually took up arms against the U.S. military. Well, Trump wants to not rename them after other actual American heroes rather than traitors, people who committed treason against the United States. And of course, this came up on Fox News Sunday. This is Mike Emanuel, the guest host of Fox News Sunday, talking to Democratic Senator from Rhode Island, Jack Reed, on this Confederate. I don't know why Trump has this weird fetish for the Confederacy. Maybe you can let me know why you think that is down in the comment section while we watch this 3-minute clip from Fox News Sunday this morning over here.
President Trump is threatening to veto the bipartisan National Defense Authorization Act over renaming military installations that bear Confederate names. As a former Army Ranger who served at Fort Benning and Fort Bragg, what about this name issue?
I think we've finally come to grips with our history, and we've come to grips with it in the appropriate way. This was a bipartisan initiative. It came out of the Armed Services Committee on a bipartisan basis. It wasn't a Republican initiative or a Democratic initiative. It was supported by the committee, by and large, with very few exceptions. And it's coming to the floor of the Senate as a bipartisan initiative. And I think what it recognizes is that these individuals defied their country, abandoned their uniform, and fought against the United States of America. And to later on, and in many cases it was 50 or 60 years later, to name a post after these individuals does not represent what I think should be consistent with our, honoring of American military heroes. The factor, I think, that is important today is when you look at a post in the United States military, it is composed of men and women. It's composed of Americans of all different races. It cannot be named, I think, for someone who basically pledged his service to a system that was based on slavery. That has to be changed, and we will. It's a 3-year process. At the end of those 3 years, with local input, with military input, with historic input, we'll have a name, I think, that is much more fitting for the institution and for the history of the country.
As the ranking Democrat on the Armed Services Committee, what's the big picture impact if the president vetoes the defense authorization?
It would be reckless. You would be abandoning the welfare of the troops, their pay raises, their quality of living, the housing improvements we made, the platforms that they need, literally the ammunition that they'll need. All of it for not an issue that I think is comparable, and indeed an issue which is being advanced on a bipartisan basis. This is not an example of the president responding to the cries of the entire country and helping save us from ourselves. I mean, when you have situations where the Assembly in the state of Mississippi chooses to recommend the elimination of the Confederate battle flag, that shows something about where the country is headed. And the president does not want to go and lead the country. He wants to pull them back, and that's wrong.
The Supreme Court's about to wrap its term. As always, there is speculation about possible...
And the part I cut out there was Mike Emanuel on Fox News Sunday asking Jack Reed about the possibility that I've heard this rumor that Clarence Thomas might retire so that he can be replaced by some young conservative. Trump and Mitch McConnell are going to replace someone on the Supreme Court before Trump loses, because as you saw in all the news summaries, it looks like Trump's going to lose. Of course, it's still several months to the election. Things could change, but Trump's strategy of being a pandemagogue, of fomenting racial tensions in a time when U.S. public opinion just shifted 30 points in favor of Black Lives Matter. It was 30-something% of people supported the idea that Black Lives Matter 6 months ago, and now it's 60%. It's gone from 30 to 60% approval. The idea that police need to be reformed has also done a similar change in public opinion polls, and Trump's response is to try to gin up his base of people who wish we had more Confederate monuments. We got to protect those Confederate monuments. So anyway, that's what you saw in the previous clips. But the thing that is really killing Trump's chances for re-election, that's making him a huge loser in 2020 unless the trajectory of the election changes substantially in the next few months, is what's happening with coronavirus, COVID-19, the deaths, the cavalier disinformation coming out of the Trump campaign. And that's going to come in these final 2 newsmaker clips. The first one is the mayor of Phoenix, Arizona, Kate Gallego, talking to Martha Raddatz on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. And you'll see here she explains why Arizona has the highest per capita COVID-19 case increase in the nation. And it has to do with people, first the public, when they got rid of the whatever restrictions there were in Arizona, people went way overboard on the social gathering. Also, their governor, the Republican Governor Ducey in Arizona, has preempted localities like the mayor of Phoenix here from putting in their own restrictions. It has to be statewide, and they've been way too lax on their restrictions. And then, of course, the mixed messages from the Trump administration. It's all in this 2-minute, 40-second clip from ABC talking about one of the many U.S. hotspots for coronavirus that apparently is going to lose Trump re-election, as I will talk about with you after we watch that clip together over here.
Finally, let's turn to Arizona, the state with the highest daily new cases per capita in the country. Phoenix Mayor Kate Gallego joins us. Your county, which includes Phoenix, has by far the most COVID cases in Arizona, climbing from fewer than 10,000 at the beginning of June to over 55,000 now. So what happened there?
We opened way too early in Arizona. We were one of the last states to go to stay at home and one of the first to reemerge, and we reemerged at 0 to 60. We had crowded nightclubs handing out free champagne, no masks. Our 20 to 44-year-olds, which is my own demographic, really led the explosion, and we've seen such growth in that area. We're seeing a lot of people go to large family gatherings and infect their family members. We are in a crisis related to testing. I was visiting a testing facility this weekend, people waiting still 8 hours. It's really, really difficult. I've been spending time begging everyone from Walgreens to open up testing, out-of-state testing companies to come in, because it's awful to see people waiting in a car while you're feeling sick. People were running out of gas. And this is many months in. We've asked FEMA if they could come and do community-based testing here. We were told they're moving away from that, which feels like they're declaring victory while we're still in crisis mode.
And Mayor, do you think a stay-at-home order should be given?
Our governor has preempted us from closing different types of businesses or moving restaurants to takeout only. We really want as many tools as possible. We had to beg to be able to implement masking orders. We were originally preempted from doing that, but I'm thankful the governor did allow cities to put masking orders in place, which I think will help. If you've seen some of the data from communities that had them, masks do slow the spread and can be important also to indicate to us that we are still in a crisis and have to take this seriously. I think when nightclubs were open, it sent the signal that we had, again, defeated COVID, and obviously that is not the case.
And many mixed messages coming from all over the place. Is that a problem?
It is. President Trump was in my community, chose not to wear a mask, and he's having large events while I am trying to push people that you need to stay at home and that events with more than 10 people are dangerous per the Centers for Disease Control.
Thank you very much for joining us, Mayor. And
So, yeah, I think that is a good indication of how bad things have gotten in Arizona, with especially with their governor, Ducey, not related to Steve Ducey, who you saw in Steve Ducey's one of the hosts of Fox and Friends. And if you watch the NBC News Meet the Press News Summary clip 2 I showed at the very end, even Steve Ducey was saying, maybe it would be good for the president to wear a mask. And even the president has started to saying, he looks good in a mask. He wore a black mask that made him look like the Lone Ranger. Of course, Lone Ranger's mask is up here. His mask that doesn't even make sense. But like anything President Trump says that makes sense. And one thing also I forgot to mention that the mayor of Phoenix pointed out there, I talked about the problems with the preemption from the governor, the mixed messages from Trump, but also lack of testing. And that was something you saw in the CBS News Face the Nation news summary, where they talked about people in Arizona waiting in their cars for 8 hours, some people running out of gas, and then they ran out of tests. And Trump back in March said anyone who wants a test can get a test. Still not true in July. March, April, May, June. Still not true 4 months later. Should this guy lose? Should this guy lose election as president? I mean, unless it's the most, well, things can still change, but he's losing because he should lose, because he's done a really, really bad job on handling the coronavirus crisis, and even the messaging. This next clip is the one, this is sort of the clip of the week. Usually I say Jake Tapper does the best job cross-examining members of the Trump administration. Jake isn't there this week, and Dana Bash is in, also does a great job. So I don't know, maybe it's the producers at CNN State of the Union. I saw in the comments in my recorded show last week, someone was saying Jake Tapper is not a great cross-examiner. Why do you keep saying that? So he wasn't there this week, and Stephen Hahn, the commissioner of the FDA, still got really well cross-examined by Dana Bash. Better than Martha Raddatz did it. That's why I didn't show the Martha Raddatz clip. Also cross-examining him on this same clip. You'll see here, Dana Bash shows the clip, cross-examines. This guy is a member of the Trump administration, a doctor, but still, he'll say it's not true. 99% of coronavirus cases are harmless. 20% of people end up in the hospital or apparently get oxygen, according to Dana Bash. But he'll say that information isn't true, but Trump saying it can't say that's not true. In the final news clip, Stephen Hahn getting grilled by Dana Bash in the final news clip, like I said, for tonight over here.
Me this morning. I want to start with something the president said last night. I want you to listen to.
Now we have tested almost 40 million people. By so doing, we show cases, 99% of which are totally harmless.
Dr., 99% of coronavirus cases are, quote, completely harmless. No health expert that we have found can back that up. Can you?
So we know that cases are surging in the country. We've all seen the graphs associated with that. And it's just too early, and I'm not going to speculate on what the causation is there. What I can tell you is the way out of this, Dana, the way out of this for all Americans is to follow the CDC and the White House Task Force guidelines, social distance, wear a mask if you find yourself in a situation where you can't social distance, good hand hygiene, all the things that I would tell my patients. And if you're near someone who's vulnerable and you think you've been exposed, please take care and avoid exposing that person who's vulnerable.
Well, Dr. Hahn, I think it's really important to stick to the question about the 99% that the president threw out there. I can tell you it's not true, and that's obviously not my opinion. It is fact based on the CDC estimates. Only about a third of coronavirus cases are asymptomatic. The WHO says, the World Health Organization says, about 20% of people diagnosed with coronavirus are sick enough to need oxygen or hospital care. And this is really important. Probably one of the most important misclaims or frankly lies that the president has put out there, because it really affects people's health. If they hear the president saying 99% of people are fine, they're going to change their behavior, potentially get sick, infect other people. How does that make you feel as a member of his own task force?
I totally support the CDC and the information that they're putting out with respect to this pandemic. I think it's, again, really important the guidelines that we've emphasized, the data that we have. Again, it's a rapidly evolving situation, and we're going to have more data, but we absolutely must take this seriously. We must institute these public health measures. We cannot back off from those. It's critically important for Americans to follow those guidelines and to protect the most vulnerable.
And Dr. Hahn, I realize this is not easy for you. You are working really hard to try to protect Americans. So I just have to ask you flatly, to that end, to protect Americans, is the president wrong?
So I'm not going to get into who's right and who's wrong. What I'm going to say, Dana, is what I've said before, which is that it's a serious problem that we have. We've seen this surge in cases. We must do something to stem the tide, and we have this in our power to do it by following the guidance from the White House Task Force and the CDC.
So you won't say whether 99% of coronavirus cases are, quote, completely harmless is true or false, what the president said at the White House last night?
Dana, what I'll say is that we have data in the White House Task Force. Those data show us that this is a serious problem. People need to take it seriously.
Okay, I want to move on to something else that the president said and did at the 4th of
And that was pretty humiliating for Stephen Hahn. You have to admit it was a little less humiliating on ABC, so that's why I showed the more humiliating version. But that was, I understand you have a hard job, but you have to admit your boss's lies are causing many Americans to die. Isn't that true? That was, that's what I mean by a cross-examination grilling, where the question is, your boss is causing many Americans to die. Why won't you admit it? Follow up, follow up, follow up. That's pretty good. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section, but that's why I said that Dana Bash's cross-examination of FDA Commissioner Stephen Hahn was the clip of the week this week, and that's my final news clip. I did promise earlier that I would have a Dash and Sandy clip, a dandy clip for you all this week as a change of pace. It still takes place near the Food and Water Bowl. I often, since I try to get Dash and Sandy interaction for you all for my Dash and Sandy clip, and so Dash the cat likes to drink from the water bowl from Sandy the dog, and so even if I can't actually get them to interact, I sort of get the camera to go from one to the other, as I did this afternoon in the portrait mode, not landscape mode. Usually it's in landscape mode. This is portrait mode. Dash and Sandy dandy clip from this afternoon over here. And there you see you got your close-up of Sandy, your close-up of Dash, your Dash and Sandy dandy clip. I even got an extra super chat contribution there at the end from Lulu Girl for the dandy clip, so I appreciate those people who gave those super chat contributions for the live show. All the live viewers who I read a lot of the comments along the way, even some complaints about needing moderation of the live comments, and I don't know, maybe I'll look into that if I keep doing this show for more than the next 6+ months till the end of the Trump administration on January 20th, 2021. That might be the end date of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. I'm not sure. You can let me know what you think about that possibility if you're in the live comments, if you're a recorded show viewer. Also, if you want to support the show in a way that how could I give up all that financial support in January 2021 and stop doing the show? Well, if I have that much financial support, maybe I will keep going. There are links down in the video description to be a monthly patron on Patreon. There's a join button down there. And also, of course, I appreciate just people who give me supportive comments along the way. And anyway, that's the end of LiberalViewer Sunday live clip roundup for this Sunday. I hope you appreciate the 9 or 10 hours I spent this Sunday, as I do every Sunday for the last 7 years plus of Sundays, 376 Sundays, and I will be back next Sunday and every Sunday through January 20th, 2021, and possibly beyond. And anyway, until next week, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.